And I think we're all here. So as soon as we all settle down, an exciting session of social impact. Great, well, thanks very much. My name's Jeremy Nichols. I'm the Chief Executive of the Social Return on Investment Network. So I live, breathe, and will probably have carved on my tombstone the importance of measuring the difference that we're making. But I don't get to bang on about that today because we've got three other illustrious speakers who I'm just here to have the honour of chairing. Before we start that, I just want to ask you two questions. So my first question is, in 5 years' time, how many of you think that the world will have become more equal than it is today? More equal. Anybody? Okay. 2.5 people. Fantastic. Yeah, you were scratching your nose, I didn't even count. So we're going to have a therapy session for you later, the two of you. The rest of us, we doubt that the world will become more equal. And given that this is what, we set up at the beginning of today, we're talking about a program of work that should increase social impact, and if by that we don't mean reduce inequality, then I'm not sure what it does mean. And there's times when I think that language gets in the way of reminding us that actually this is about increasing equality, reducing environmental degradation, and none of us think it's going to happen. So that's a little bit depressing, given that that's what we're trying to achieve, and that the reason we're interested in measurement is because we believe it can contribute to that reduction. So that's one question. My second question is, how many of you as organisations spend more money on measuring the social outcomes that you create than you do on managing your finances? Why? Okay, now this is also really ironic, because we're going to have a conversation where people are going to go, this is expensive, and yet all of us spend more money on the means to the end than we do knowing whether the end itself has been achieved. So I'll leave us with those two thoughts before we crack onto the detail, and hand us over to Lance first to give us a quick run through of his take on impact measurement.
I don't actually know what's on my slide, so I have to do them myself, else I'll have nothing to say. There we go. Down is up. Just like Jeremy was explaining. I'm Lance Potter. I'm from New Profit in Boston, Massachusetts. We're a social venture fund, one of the earliest social venture funds in the U.S. And I'm director of evaluation there. And as I'm here from the U.S., I thought I would spend just a couple of minutes telling you what what is trending in impact assessment in the U.S. these days. And I think there are a few things, actually. Impact assessment, I think over the cycle of impact assessment, generally it's a pendulum. And it kind of swings from it's the silver bullet to it's the albatross around our necks. And at the moment we're trending to the silver bullet part of the spectrum. So there are things that are going on in the U.S. around this. I think that the source of this is multiple. Part of it is just the fact that after a certain number of years of people being not very interested in impact evaluation, people begin again to realize that the programmatic methods they're using to determine whether things are working aren't working. But also, our current federal government has taken a renewed interest in program measurement, and particularly in funding against effectiveness instead of funding against program management. So this is having outcome-based funding in the U.S. federal government is moving with some real momentum now, and it's having a ripple effect throughout the philanthropic and nonprofit sectors as people are trying to respond to this. And with a second 4 years of the current administration, that is clearly going to continue for some time there. The last piece that is causing this momentum in the U.S. is that the U.S. is experiencing a very large change in educational curricula. And I won't bother you with all of that, but given that the origins of much of social program measurement come from the world of education, so much of social program measurement is driven by culturally what's going on in education right now. There's enormous change in the U.S. education sector, which is going to have this ripple effect of causing a tremendous focus in the next decade on program measurement. So there are three areas that are kind of trending right now in the U.S. One is the notion of collective impact. A lot of people are still talking about collective impact, the notion that we can assess the impact of not a single program, but multiples of programs that are working in a concerted fashion to do a single thing. The idea is that this could lead us to scale in a different way, or in one of the ways that we often talk about scale. It requires a very high degree of integration and mission coordination, and is very challenging to achieve. There's a large network called STRIDE in the U.S. that has demonstrated the power of this as a potential, but it is easily overstated. Collective impact is becoming buzz, and people are not, while some people are making it work, other people are simply saying this is all about collective impact, when in fact the missions of the organizations and their programmatic activities are just not integrated enough to make a difference. So I'd say the trend for that is uncertain. Experimental design is the randomization of program participants in social programs in order to measure the effect of the program. Experimental design is a focus of the evidence-based programming of the U.S. government right now, and is pushing into the large philanthropies, into the states, and making a real difference in how people are thinking about program measurement in the U.S. The good news about this is it is increasing rigor in a lot of places, and it holds the promise of the U.S. government making better funding decisions, at least for very, very large-scale programs where the resources to do this kind of thing are appropriate. The downside is that even this morning we heard people saying, well, RCT is not appropriate for this and that and the other thing, which is often true. It's not a reason to reject random assignment. It's a reason to say, well, what is the rational thing for us to do? And for many large programs where the stakes are very high, random assignment is probably the right answer. And it's certainly in the U.S. an answer that's going to be continuing to gain momentum for the time being. A third thing that we're seeing, and I think we may hear a little bit more about now, is social impact bonds. Social impact bonds and pay-for-success models are quite new in the U.S. They are just beginning to get a hold. This is the idea that public and private investors join together in investing in a social program, and eventually the private money is returned to them from the government when the program proves to save the government money over the previous idea. I bring this up in a data or in an impact session because these models require very rigorous evidence that the program works. In order for the investors to get their money back from the government, they've got to prove that this program works, and the government, in turn, is requiring randomization and very rigorous evaluation in order to demonstrate that this is happening. The challenge here then is money and resources. The data systems often don't exist to make this stuff happen, and so we'll see where that goes. On the left is big data. This is a very U.S. thing, but the desire to integrate data systems in the U.S. is beginning to take on real momentum, and this will happen. People are talking like it's happened now. It hasn't happened now, but it is now.
Over to you then, We're trying to keep everything fairly short so that we can have as much conversation.
Okay, so my name is Lisa Hillner. I'm the research director of the European Venture Philanthropy Association, which is the sister network of ADPN in Europe. We have something called a knowledge center, which is really where we do our research, and we have several publications on various topics that can be downloaded from our website for free. And in the past, I would say 2 years, we've been focusing a lot of effort on impact measurement. And the main reason has been that our members have requested this. They felt quite confused about impact measurement because we had some workshops where we were going through sort of various methods and tools and saying, okay, this is one tool, you can use balanced scorecard, you can use SROI, there are some indicators called within the IRIS library of indicators that can be used, etc. But then members said, well, that's all fine, but how do I actually get started? How do I do impact measurement? So we put together an expert group consisting of a lot of different organizations that are, you can see logos of, a bit small probably in the back, but really some other networks, so EVPN as well, the Global Impact Investing Network, European Foundation Center, the SRI network, and also some investors or foundations and venture philanthropy investors, consultants and academics working together in trying to come up with what is best practice in impact measurement. And are there some common threads that can be seen in all these different methods and that we can then apply? And so we worked on this for about a year, and we just published a manual on how to measure impact. Here it is. And this can also be downloaded from our website. And I just realized, because I just saw it for the first time today, in print, and it's actually a book. But you're welcome to also order it so that you have it in this hard copy version. So what we came up with, working with this group of people, was that there are 5 steps in impact measurement that are common, more or less, in most of these different methods. So we talk about setting objectives, analyzing stakeholders, measuring results, verifying and valuing impact, and monitoring and reporting. And I don't have a lot of time to go through each of these steps in detail at this point, but you're very, very welcome to have a look at this manual to know more what we mean. But really, I think it's important to point out that impact measurement is a means to an end, and the end is achieving more impact. And by measuring impact, you can actually learn how to manage impact better. And we're looking at 2 levels here. We're looking at the funder level. So if you're an investor, if you're a foundation, and you're providing funding to a social purpose organization, then you also have to manage your impact. It's important because you have to know, who are the best organizations to invest in. How do I know that? So it's about setting priorities. But also, when you are measuring the impact of the organization that you're investing in, then you have to know what are they trying to achieve as an organization. What is the social change that particular organization is trying to achieve? And how can I, as an investor, help that organization achieve the impact? This is about setting objectives, which is sort of the first step. So you have to know what you want to measure, because many people complain about, you're collecting lots of data that's not used. And that's why you have to do this first step of knowing first what you're collecting. Then you also have to engage your stakeholders, and in this sense you have to see who are the important stakeholders. So this is about selecting the stakeholders and then also engaging with them, because it's not really enough just to say, okay, this is a social change I want to achieve, but if this is not valued by the stakeholders, then there's no point. So this is that's coming to the 3rd step or the 4th step of verifying and valuing impact. But on measuring results, it's really becoming much more concrete. You know already now your theory of change, you know what you're trying to achieve, but how do you actually make that concrete? How do you set the appropriate indicators? And then finally, it's about monitoring your impact to make sure that you're actually collecting the data systematically and that you're also reporting in an appropriate manner. So this is what we've come up with, and this is the manual. And I also wanted to share a few of the lessons learned from this exercise. One is that a lot of it is about the process. It's not so much about coming up with a particular measure or a ratio. It's about learning about how you achieve impact. So going through this process is very useful for anyone, for a funder, but also for the organization that you're investing in. It's also about really taking time to set your objectives. Because as I said before, if you don't have clear objectives, you don't know where you're going. And there's no point collecting lots of data that you're not going to use. Also this point about engaging stakeholders. And also I think a very important point is that if you're a funder and you're you're setting certain indicators that you want your investee to report against, there's no point for you to set those without the investee being part of the process of setting the indicators. Because if you have just top-down indicators that the investee is not comfortable with and are not useful for the investee, there's really no point. So it has to be indicators that are useful for the organization that it is invested in, so that they can use those indicators as a management tool. So it's all coming to to this point about measuring, being very connected to managing impact. A lot of challenges remain. I mean, I think that we have progressed a lot in the past few years on impact measurement. I'm happy to say. But there's still certain challenges. One is reporting standards. I think many investees complain that they have to report in lots of different ways to different funders. That's still a challenge. Obviously, this could be improved if you actually follow the process and the indicators are the ones that make sense to the investee. There's also, as a funder, a challenge in terms of how to think about the impact at the portfolio level. Because if you're a social investor, then you might invest in various different sectors, and how do you actually aggregate those different impacts? There are different sort of streams or different ideas of how to do that, that are also mentioned in this manual. And I think it's also very important to talk about the resources. I mean, impact measurement is not something that is really easy. You can just do it, on your weekend, and you come up with something great. It's something that you really have to include in your business plan. So, and in your budget. So you might need to have a person who's working on that. And also, I think if we're talking about venture philanthropy at this conference, and a venture philanthropy organization is trying to provide both financial and non-financial support. And many say that, okay, the non-financial support is actually more useful than the financial support. And that sounds great, but is that really true? Are you actually measuring that? Are you actually checking that that's true? And I think that's one of the challenges also for venture philanthropists to go further than just anecdotes, to actually see if what they're doing has an impact. And I have some next steps. One is that we're implementing now is to issue guidelines on impact measurement. So going a step further than this and actually looking at more high-level guidelines. We're also launching a training program, and we're also working together with the European Commission on regulation on impact measurement for what is now being launched as European Social Entrepreneurship Funds. But I think that we can now, I will now hand over to the next speaker, and then we can have some questions at the end. Thank you.
You'll be used to that.
I'll be used to that, yeah, wrong side of the country. Okay, there's always a flaw in going third, in that usually people have covered the stuff that you were going to cover. I just wanted to start by asking a question. How many people in the audience have actually done any impact measurement in their organisation? So probably about half, okay. Because I realise that we're chucking out a lot of terms here, like social return on investment and balanced scorecard, and not sure whether this is language that people are familiar with, but it's a new language to you. Anyway, my name is Kevin Robbie. I'm the Executive Director at Social Ventures Australia. The astute in the audience will notice that I'm not Australian. I come from Scotland. I've been in Australia for 5 years. I'll give you a bit of an explanation about what SVA do, because that sort of sets the scene to a couple of my thoughts around what are the challenges and issues in the impact measurement space. You'll have heard my Chief Executive speaking earlier on today. We're a venture philanthropy organisation. We've been around for 10 years. The main focus of the organisation is around investment into education and employment ventures. And so we primarily try and identify innovative ventures in the employment education space and help them to grow to scale. For about the past 5 or 6 years, we've also started to move into this area of collaborative projects and really recognising that even if you find a really good venture working on its own, it's not actually achieving the change that we want to see happen. And a lot of the research evidence was leading us down the route of looking at how do we get ventures to collaborate with each other, to collaborate with other non-profits, to bring government into that equation in terms of collaboration. And so we've got about 5 or 6 projects that we run. And then from both of those areas, we try and take practical insights out that we share with others on an open source basis or use in terms of advocacy. Now, there should be 2 other things that appeared on the screen there, but they haven't. So I don't know what happened there. As an aside, we have a consulting business. We were approached about... Just here. We set up a consulting business about 5 or 6 years ago, and the rationale for that was we were being approached by a lot of larger non-profits looking to come into our portfolio. And so we basically started setting up a fee-for-service business to them and modelled on Bridgespan in the States. And then more recently we set up an impact investing business based around the Good Start transaction that Michael talked about this morning. And we've now got an $8.5 million fund that we run and invest in social enterprises. And we've started doing some work around social impact bonds. And picking up on Lance's point, I think there's a lot of challenges around impact measurement within the impact investing area that I could probably elaborate on in questions, but I won't talk about it here. We really focus on 3 main areas. One is how to improve the capital flow into the non-profit sector. Our take on Australia, and I think from having worked in the UK, I would say the same here, is that the flow of money into the non-profit sector is illogical. And sometimes contracts from government are too short, they are not fully funded, philanthropy comes in and doesn't actually fund properly, you can't attract other forms of capital into the sector very efficiently. So we're looking at how to get a flow of capital into the sector that actually helps organisations innovate, grow, scale, and put out their lessons from that. There's a big challenge in terms of attracting talent into the sector, but also for us a big desire to build on the evidence base and know what works. And so right from the start within the organisation, we have been pursuing impact measurement and trying to work out the impact of the ventures that we invest into. So, what's our main approach? We do a lot of work around social return on investment. Jeremy is the Chief Executive of Social Return Investment Network. I don't know if you like it when I say this or not, but I did a piece of work in the UK about 6 or 7 years ago now, where I had to assess all the impact measurement tools that were out there and make a recommendation to the UK government as to what the best tool was for them to use. And when you started to look into the sector, what you found was there was a lot of things out there, but they'd only been used once or twice, and there hadn't really been any robust testing of them. And I, at that point, said to the UK government, well, SRI is the best of a bad bunch. And if you're going to develop anything, then it's probably the tool to back in terms of developing that. When I turned up at Social Ventures Australia 5 years ago, found out that there were 5 or 6 models of SRLI that had been developed that Jeremy was then trying to rationalise into one, and SVA had their own model that I wasn't even aware of at that point. And so I said to them, look, you can either do one of two things. You can continue developing your own model, or you can actually adopt this model that's coming out of the UK that's going to have a lot of people working on it internationally. And so that's what SVA have done. They paused, they waited till the guide came out, and then really got on board with this idea of getting our staff trained in this and actually going out and doing SRLIs. And so in the past 3 years, we've now done about 60 or 70 social return on investment analysis. These are either forecasts for organisations that are starting up, what we call baselines, so going into organisations who might have been in existence for a number of years but have never tried to measure their impact, so we try to get a baseline of where they're at, or evaluations that we've done on organisations. And then trying to encourage more and more organisations to go public and start to share the results of what they do in terms of SROI. And it's based around 7 principles, so it's involving stakeholders, understanding your theory of change, being transparent about what you do, understanding the value you're creating, not over-claiming, and being verified in terms of the process. So if you want to know more, we've published an article in our quarterly around that. The other thing that we do with a lot of organisations, and probably the core and fundamental part of our work, is around programme logic. What we find for any organisation that comes to us in terms of asking to come into the portfolio, and we have 15 organisations in our portfolio, and then about another 40 that we work with in our pipeline. So we probably see about 100 organisations a year in terms of coming into this. One of the common things and a common thread through all of them is they don't understand their programme logic. So you sit down with organisations and go, what are you trying to do and what impact are you trying to achieve through this? And usually, and I think it's a common thing within the not-for-profit sector, people have just tried to do too much and they add a bullet point to their mission statement every year to justify what they're doing to a new funder. And there's just complete confusion. So we go in and do a lot of work with organisations to get them back to basics, to actually understand the programme logic or their theory of change. And then that ties into the social return on investment work that we do with organisations at a later date. In terms of my observations on the challenges that face the sector, I'm showing my age here in terms of references to Monty Python and the Holy Grail. But how many people are familiar with the Judean People's Front and the People's Front of Judea? Just the 1, 2, right, that's it. 3, 4. I really should get a new set of references. So the premise for this is they actually. They're two militias that hate each other more than they hate the Romans, who were occupying their land. And it's a funny joke if you get the film. But I think that's one of the challenges in the not-for-profit space. If you go out and actually talk about impact measurement, most tools are developed by consultants, and most of these consultants are arguing over their 1% of difference, rather than the 99% of commonality that's in there. And I think that's a big challenge within the sector. And actually getting people on board with doing something is probably better than doing nothing. I think the second big challenge, probably that we've got, is this whole idea, and Lance talked about it, in terms of collective impact. So you imagine the scenario that what we find is if we're going into an individual organisation, we find that they don't know what they're doing in terms of their programme logic, and it takes a lot of time to get that in place. If you try to group a set of organisations to do that, then you're just multiplying that problem in terms of lots of organisations that don't understand their programme logic, and don't understand how to work together, and don't understand how to develop a collective impact programme logic. And echoing Lance's point, I think there's a lot of hype about collective impact, and not a lot of people that are actually doing impact measurement as part of the collective impact. And so I think people jumping on that bandwagon should be very aware of what the problems are in that.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Lance. So we've thrown a lot at you there, so hopefully you're now about to ask lots and lots of detailed, difficult technical questions that will floor this lot. But just before and while you're doing that, I just think I wanted to add a couple of little bits to summarise and add. We've heard from a couple of investors really, and a network body representing investors. I just want to touch on the experience as a social enterprise. I'm a director of a social enterprise, and just look at it from that point of view. This is a social enterprise based in the UK, turns over about 4 million equivalent in Singapore. And we're quite good at this stuff, this measurement thing. We've been producing reports on our social impact for the last 10 years, I think, maybe longer, all on our website, FRC Group. What we've just recently done, though, which has changed the way we think about this, is moving from a we should report on how brilliant we are to a, are we really using this as a strategy tool internally? And so, like many organisations, we have a finance subcommittee. Now we have a social value subcommittee. And we're setting a social value budget as an organisation which the board sign off, so that as an organisation we can spend as much time managing the finances and whether we're doing all right on the finance budget, as now we'll spend managing the social value that we say we're creating. And there's one or two kind of quick tips, and Kevin made one of them on this stuff. If you're not doing anything, just start. Don't get too hung up about the perfect answer, just start doing something. And if you want to kind of make sure that has some traction and embeds itself in the organisation, make sure someone on your board is interested in this. If there's a voice on the board going, what are we doing about that? Are we really making an impact? How do we really know? Are you creating as much value as you really could with the money we're giving you? That kind of question. Then you'll start to pick up tempo. And I think when we do that, we've done it because we feel we're in the business of changing people's lives. We really should know whether we are. So it's been a kind of moral position. But it's been matched by a competitive position. You need both of those arguments to really make this work inside organisations. We weren't winning business because of our ability to understand our value, or we wouldn't do it probably. Just the moral bit wasn't enough by itself. So that's the kind of social enterprise take on this. I'm also the chair of the Social Impact Analysts Association, and within that role, we've been noticing, and I think it's true, that despite what you will hear about so many different tools and so many different ways, and isn't it all very confusing, actually there's a lot of convergence. And there's a lot of kind of way this language is not helping. We all confuse ourselves, we throw stuff at you, which doesn't really help clarify that I think, generally speaking, people are moving to a lot more consistency about the basic questions that we're trying to answer if we say, are we making as much difference as we can? Underneath that, there's a lot of commonality. I think Kevin's right, there's a lot of this kind of, I've got the new tool, the new magic bullet. Well, we need to get over that. We have one way worldwide of doing financial accounting, pretty much, and we need to get the equivalent level of consistency. We're going to really shift capital flows into this space and reduce the cost of capital. And that's going to need some people giving a little bit of ground and getting off some of the kind of, sometimes in their own advantage to argue there's so much difference out there. I think though within that, one of the big first questions you have to ask yourself is, what question am I asking and who is it for? If you want to influence government policy, then you're going to have to do this at a level of rigor which is substantially higher than if you're sitting in the boardroom going, which program shall we do next year? We can only afford one. And being really clear about what level of rigor you need really helps you understand whether you should be doing a randomized controlled trial or whether you can do a pre and post analysis and wave your finger in the air because you are willing to take a certain amount more risk under one route than the other route. For those of you who want to have lots more of this stuff, then we've got the opportunity to facilitate. We've got a few spaces on the workshops tomorrow. You can join Lance workshop, you can join Lisa and me. We'll try and persuade Kevin to come along. You're not doing anything like that, are you? Fantastic. I'm watching the live. So you can come along to that. I think on the positive side, I think there is a lot more progression. We are moving closer. We're getting there. But I still think there's two scenarios. Having spent a lot of time in this, see two potential directions. One is positive. One is a world in which businesses are starting to make more decisions based on a deep understanding of which will create more social value than the other. It's embedded in their organizations. They're able to summarize that information if they need to for funders, policymakers, or the public, or whoever it is, but it's built on basic data that they need in their business to make better decisions. And that's my kind of optimistic one. I think the other one is a bit more risky. I think that there is a potential conflict, if you want, between the investor community and the investee community. Investors are searching deals which create social impact. Yes, please. The investees, the organisations say, well, we're great, we can give you social impact, no problem. And if we're not careful, people for whom we are supposed to be creating that social value, we're supposed to get that, their voice isn't in there. There's an accountability breakdown between that, within that little triangle. And so there's a risk that we rubber stamp all this, and we go, yeah, we've got our social impact, great, everyone's really happy, it's not really driving decisions, and the level of inequality is still going up. And that's what we all thought was going to be the case with this stuff. So they're my two risks. I hope the positive one will come to pass, but we'll see. Questions?
When you assess impact, do you assess secondary effects? For example, what I mean is that, let's say you have a program that helps ex-offenders find jobs. And he is successful, there is impact on him. But there is the secondary effects is that the family members, the impact on his family members, or on society, supporting. Do you take that into account at all or not?
Yes, definitely. We're doing a piece of work at the moment. So one of the big challenges we had was starting to do social return on investment analysis with organisations, and people would do one. So they would do their one analysis, and then they'd wave it around for 5 years, going, "This is our report," and you wouldn't do that with a set of financial accounts. Or if you did, you said, "Here's our audited accounts in 2007," you'd probably be a bit suspicious of that organisation. So we have been starting to encourage the ventures in our portfolio to do SROIs year on year. And as we're doing that, we're getting a far greater understanding of the ripple effects of the impact that they're having. So one of the examples we've got is an organisation called Gamida, who are an Indigenous organisation based in a town in Victoria, and they work to get young kids out of school and into employment. But actually, they're now on their second SROI, and what we're finding through that is a ripple effect in terms of reduced teenage pregnancies, reduced use of drugs, and reduced use of criminal justice. None of which were picked up in the first SROI, and we're now getting this coming through the second one. So I think the more of these we do, then the more of those multiplier effects we'll find through that, and then hopefully we'll place a value on it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it goes a little bit to what Rob was saying before about what is the goal in your theory of change. So, if you start out to say we want to have effects, we believe that the preventing recidivism in these ex-offenders and giving them a chance is not going to have just an effect on them. That we're aiming for a community effect, or we're aiming for a family effect. Then you start your entire theory of change, which will lead to what you're going to measure from there. At that point, it's mostly a question of the cost and complexity. When you go from that offender to the whole family or to a whole neighborhood of families, the number of variables that you want to at least have some sense of, whether you're going to control for them tightly or just have some understanding what the landscape is. The number of variables goes up and up and up. And so your confidence, it takes more effort to be confident in your finding, but absolutely.
So the secondary effect issue cropped up, you were talking about, so just to give you one example, from the workshop on water with Toshi, just before this one, we were talking about the effects outcomes of solar lamps. And just to know one of those outcomes, the main outcome was that people have more time to do other work activities. One of the secondary effects of solar lighting that came out of research in Africa was a decrease in pregnancy rates. I think
Just a little bit of a follow-on question and also an invitation to make a general point. As you measure the ripple outwards, if you choose to do that, you also have to deal with the increasing challenge of attribution. So a question about how you deal with attribution generally with the different toolkits you have available.
Okay, we'll take another question as well.
This is the first time for me foundation. One of the problems we're grappling with is the seeming disconnect between the amount of time you need to be able to really measure outcome or welfare outcomes well, and the frequency by which social enterprises change their business models. If you look at the studies of Esther Duflo and Dean Carlin, one of the first comments there was that, of course, you ran it for 2 years. What did you expect? And then that was kind of the excuse in some ways that microfinance institutions use to say that you needed 3 more years, 4 more years. And that's fine, it's understandable. But at the same time, we're trying to support institutions that reinvent themselves every 3 months or so, right? And so, and we push them to become more innovative and have to kind of refine, improve their products every so often. And so there seems to be this, so how can you get to a point where you have a steady state solution which can become tested in a stable, clinical way? And
so managing changes in business models more frequently than your outcomes are expected to be managed, and the attribution business.
It's a real problem, and I think it's you know, the tension. The tension is this a problem of the evaluators, or is this a problem of the program people? The evaluators like to point to the program people and say, well, you're the one that changes the model every 45 minutes. And the program people point to the evaluators and say, you're so incredibly inflexible. And they look like a squabbling couple. No, I think that it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to do the big, expensive program evaluation on a model that is going to continue to evolve in a very significant way. If the program designers, think that the core of their model, the essence of what's driving their theory of change is staying the same, and there are sort of changes around that are responding to local conditions or something, then you can start talking about doing a big outcome, a serious outcome evaluation, and understanding the noise that's going to be around that. If people are entirely revising their theory of change or the way that they're operationalizing their program on a regular basis, the program is probably not ready for outcome evaluation yet. I would say the program needs more focus on what are they implementing, what are the processes, why is it and is it not working, and those things are going to be of greater value to the program than trying to measure a moving target with all the others.
I just wanted to turn it around as well. I think that what we've seen is that impact measurement is really also about learning. So I think that you have to be quite flexible in the impact measurement, and it might be that because of the impact that you measure, or you find that the organization is actually not targeting the right type of or it's not doing the right type of activity, and that's why they have to change their business model. So it can also work the other way around, and I think that it's important to think of impact measurement as a learning tool and something that is flexible. It's not something that is completely set in stone, and that's it. That's my answer to that question. And to Rob's question, hi Rob. What we've seen in our research is that it's a huge challenge for many foundations to move from measuring output to measuring outcome. Outcome is more than about the changes, the long-term effects of what you're doing. And then to go a step further and measure impact in a really precise way can be quite challenging. And that's then coming to looking at things like attribution and dead weight. And if you can do that, that's great, but it's not maybe about coming up with an exact value, but actually trying to figure out what those effects are. But just we're recommending in the manual to just try to go to, at least try to come to the outcome level, which means then that you're not just looking at, for example, how many lives have been touched by a particular program, but actually looking at the long-term effects. And that's quite challenging already. And if you then can try to look at attribution, then that's another step forward. But it's not something that you have to come up with a really exact value, because we really think that what's important is learning from the process.
Yeah, I'll deal with the attribution question first. I think it's an absolute core thing that we do within SVA. Going to the point of going people throw around the terms like dead weight, attribution, displacement. For me, it's just questions that an organisation should be asking. So, what would happen if you did nothing? Who else is doing this? What are the negative effects, if any, of what you're doing? And they're core questions that if an organisation hasn't asked itself, is probably quite stupid, to be quite blunt. And what we've done is pulled them into our due diligence process. And so we won't give money to somebody who hasn't asked those questions of themselves. And so it's just drilling into that core difference between, as you say, output, outcome, impact, and trying to get to the numbers of what the organisation thinks it's actually achieving. In terms of the one about measurement of impact on organisations that are rapid or social enterprises that are rapidly changing their model, I haven't seen a lot of that. So a lot of the organisations we work with social venture Australia, people like Gambina, Beacon, have been in our programme for 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and so we're working with them over a long term, and they've not had rapid changes and complete flips over their programme. They iterate what they're doing based on learning the lessons from stuff. So it's not something I've come across in terms of that.
I'll just say one really quick thing about the attribution, and that is that I sometimes I wish that more organizations would acknowledge that there are some parts of their model in which they are in an attribution kind of framework, but there are other parts of their model in which they are in a contribution framework. And so, for example, to the question this gentleman here raised about ex-offenders, maybe it's the case that with respect to the offender, him or herself, and what immediately happens to them, it's an attribution framework. This person's only in one program, getting out of prison, and the effects of that program can be tied pretty closely to that individual. Once you get out to the family ripple, you're almost certainly in a contribution framework. You're doing things through this individual that are helping that family, but there are many other influences on that family. And to say, we're going to try to attribute, and then you get from that person out to the neighborhood, and from the neighborhood out to the community. And as you go, you're moving into a contribution framework. And the only thing that you need to show about your program is, A, that you understand that you have some sense of what those contributing forces are, and that you have some sense of what piece you are contributing to the overall group.
Yes, I'd agree with that. I think actually attribution is the flip side to collective impact. At some point, if you recognise you're attributing or contributing to others, why aren't you working with them? Because the change that you've identified is a serious change. So it's not a complete answer to the collective impact question, but it's a clue if you're asking that. And I think the other thing you're hearing is being quite pragmatic on this. There's a learning, it's not going to be perfect. There is a danger out there that we kind of look for a level of rigour in this, which is a social science test of exactness. It doesn't exist. It's been really challenging. Well, you might be able to do it for, again, massive programs influencing governments, but most of the time we're trying to make better decisions tomorrow than we made yesterday in a world of imperfect information. So don't let social science drag you down. Financial accounting accepts a lower test of truth than often program evaluations. That's bizarre as well. So, good enough to help learn and make better decisions next time. Yes. No, you can't say good one with a hand up.
I'd like to ask a question to Lance regarding the social impact fund. Given social impact fund is a multi-party collaboration, and also it only pays based on outcome. So what is the appropriate level of complexity for impact assessment? And also, who should be designing the impact assessment? And who should measure that afterwards?
Yes, we'll take a couple. So that's the social impact bond question emerging, Toshi.
So in our area, people recognize the importance of impact assessment, but they all say that it's very expensive and consuming, it's difficult to find. And yet we see that there's exciting development and very simple and cheap technology that can help the organizations like us. We use the mobile SMS, and we used to use the GPS-enabled device with a sensor to put on top of the cook stove so that we know that people are using or using or not. And so these are, I think, a real great opportunity for all of us. And I'm just wondering, how do you see the trajectory of these use of these simple devices to make this transaction cost helpful?
Technology and finally.
Yeah, this is kind of relating to both questions. And what are you guys seeing in terms of the time, complexity, and costs and capabilities that the organizations are backing need to build in to evaluate and track their own impact?
My personal limit of memory is only 2 questions. So I'll try to get to the third and maybe you can remember what it is when I get there. Social impact bond question. At least in practical terms, what I'm seeing so far is that these are not going to go forward without randomized studies. Something Jeremy said about the issue of how rigorous, how much certainty do you need to have in the study that you're doing. If it matters to you, if the difference in some point estimate, of information about a population, if the difference between 13.5 and 13.7 is going to change government funding, then you need a randomized trial. If you don't know the difference between 3 and 29, you probably can get pretty close without a randomized trial to information that you can use. In this social impact bond stuff, because the governments are agreeing to pay for certainty that these things are working better than what they're paying for and are cheaper, they want rigor. And government is inclined to rigor, at least in the US, it's all about accountability for the dollars, and so rigor just comes with that territory. These are being designed by external firms who are usually being hired by the social impact, the people organizing the social impact investment. The second question, I got to one in fact. I can't remind myself. Technology, absolutely. I think that is a really important and big new play. I know in health communication, it's been going on like gangbusters for quite a few years now, using SMS and using the phones. They're also using this in compliance in healthcare programs because you can take a little picture of somebody, doing a procedure, taking a pill, and it's very, very effective. And I think it will continue. And that's going to decrease the cost of data collection, and that will make some of this stuff more accessible. In some contexts, that's also going to increase the volume of data that are available. Like databases, I mentioned, the big data idea. In a lot of places, data systems don't talk to each other, and so it's very, very expensive to collect data across groups of people where the information actually exists and nobody can bring it together. Those things are also going to bring down the cost of that stuff, so that you'll need fewer people doing that kind of thing. And the third question, which I definitely...
The cost of resources examples in your organization, any guidance?
I think it's, I think every organization should be investing resources in it appropriate to their size and scale. So very small, very startup organizations may not need to put a lot of resources into it. They may need to put more time into it, into thinking about what are their goals and to understanding what is their theory of change, which is not inherently an expensive thing to do. You just have to sit at a table. As you grow and your program becomes more complex, the resources for data collection become larger, for planning, and when you become really large and you're operating a huge program, then you're going to need to put serious investment into it. I mean, in the US context, most people say that for outcome evaluation, you should be thinking about 7 to 10% of your programmatic dollars should be going into program evaluation of some sort. It's just as an evaluator, I would say 12 to 15, but it's just because I have to pay.
Then I'll see you spend about 1.
I just wanted to comment on the last question about resources, because it's been one of the big discussions for us also when we have been doing this research. I think that for the venture philanthropy organization, so the funder, it's important that there's someone in the foundation or the fund who's responsible for impact measurement. So it doesn't have to be a full-time job. I mean, it depends, as Lance said, on the size. So if it's a very big foundation with lots of different investments, then it might be a full-time job. But if it's a smaller foundation, it could be someone doing it part-time. But at least someone responsible for it. And then also, another thing is, in order to make impact, part of what everyone is doing in a foreign investor, we also look at how to include impact in the chain of investing. So starting from selecting the deals until doing your due diligence and your portfolio management, etc. So that's why it's important that that the person who's responsible for impact is also part of those decisions. So if you have an investment committee, then the impact person should also be part of that. So some recommendations like that. And also, if you're looking at your investee, then if you're a venture philanthropy organization, you're providing non-financial support, and you see that the organization that you're investing in is maybe a very early stage and doesn't really have the capabilities yet of measuring impact, you might want to include that in the plan of the kind of support that you want to give, just so that you make sure that this is actually happening.
Yeah, I think for me, probably Jeremy touched on this a bit earlier on, it really depends, partly the resources depend on what you want to use the impact measurement work you're doing for. If it's internal and it's just for you to try and understand where you're having impact, that's probably less resource heavy than if you're trying to develop something that you want to use to make a case to government regarding change. And so what you want to do your impact work for will dictate some of the resources. I think also, Lance has touched on this, there's a bit of a dance that happens in the sector, apologies to funders in the room, but between funders and the non-profits. In that funders go, we want impact measurement, but they don't want to pay for it. And until that is squared, until that circle's squared, then there's a lot of bullshit that just goes on in this sector about that. And so within SVA, we're quite clear that if we bring someone into our portfolio and they don't do impact measurement, then we'll invest into them to get that done. But actually, we'll have asked a lot of questions before they got into the portfolios on why they haven't done it and what impact they think they're having. So that's quite crucial for us. Touching on the social impact bond question. We're doing one of the first bonds in Australia, and they're not doing randomised control trials with that. They're doing it with a control group in terms of how they've done that, and the measurement is being done by government. I quite like the idea of social impact bonds. I probably have a couple of cynicism about them. I think that most of the bonds I've looked at have been designed quite badly. And you actually need to take a step back, and an organisation that I like, somebody like Me Philanthropic Capital in the UK, that if you're going into a sector, you really need to analyse the sector, what the problem is, what the solutions are, who's working and who's doing it best, and only then would you actually start to choose someone for a bond. And at the moment, it's a sort of free-for-all with people rushing with their ideas, and really if I was an investor, I wouldn't be putting any money into any of those bonds. And then the other cynicism I have is that, again, apologies to any academics in the room, but the only money people are making money out of bonds at the moment are academics, and the second group that will make money out of it are consultants. And really that doesn't do the end user any good. And so there's a lot of work that's got to be done about getting bonds right, because at the moment they're probably the most overhyped thing on the planet in terms of this sector, and there's a lot of other stuff that needs to be done properly. And I say that from an organisation that spent 3 years really trying to work out how to do the bonds properly, and being, aghast at some of the hype that goes on in Australia about these.
So is there anybody left that Kevin hasn't apologised to? Look at the day. So just on the cost thing, this will cost money. Of course it will. But you've got to think about that in terms of the benefit you expect first, and only spend as much money as you think you're going to get benefit for. Don't spend any more. You've got to do that trade-off internally. In FRC, we're big enough. We have a full-time impact manager. We kind of kept that going for a long, long time. We've had a tough trading period. Our turnover's gone down. We haven't cut that function because the board made it a priority. So once you've made that benefit cost, this is a question of priorities. We don't get funded to do it. We make sure we got the money to do it. So if you think it's important, and you think you can get a benefit, spend up to that point, and just start with that. We've got time for maybe one more question. Maybe any others? Well, we just that's it. You want the last question? Thank you.
Maybe it's a designated question, but how can you ensure through an SRI analysis that other dimensions of qualitative, or for example, the beneficiary satisfaction can be included? can be included, or if it's not possible, how can a model be built through an SRI and also through other approaches that can include more informal, more qualitative aspects?
I think by asking the right questions of stakeholders. So, SROI starts with stakeholder engagement, not just the funder, whoever the other stakeholders in there. And if you ask a set of questions about the outcomes, I think you'll get, my background is a qualitative researcher, so you will get a whole set of qualitative information coming out about that, around customer satisfaction, around potential other ripple effects from this. One of the challenges we had with doing our first SROIs in Australia was, what did we do with that information? Because a lot of the organisations didn't want to put it in their reports, particularly if there was negative stuff in there. So we ended up almost in the same way as accountancy firms do, with a management letter that sat behind the report. So if they wanted to use the report talked about the value of the impact, but there was a separate letter that basically went, and this is what your beneficiary said about you in years. And we knew that information, and if they were in our portfolio, we could work with them around improvement. We couldn't do as much with more. I think probably about 60% of the work we've done in the SRI space has been on a consultancy basis, selling the services to other non-profits, and about 40% of organisations in our portfolio. So we obviously can't do any follow-up with the ones that are outside the portfolio.
I think that what we're recommending is that these are two ways of measuring, and it's not, sometimes it might be enough to do one, but usually they validate. You need to validate the data, and if you do just a qualitative, it might not be enough. So it's usually a good idea to do a combination of both.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think I'll call it beneficiary voice is very important, not only because we have to remember who we're doing this for. We're not supposed to be doing it for ourselves, but rather to find out that the people we are attempting to help are actually helped, and their perspective on the help that they're being given, and the value is part of the value of the program, or it should be. And in addition, people who don't like a program, it becomes an explanatory. This qualitative data becomes an explanatory factor for the results that you find. People who really love a program are probably more likely to have benefited from it, but not necessarily, and that's why it's so important to have the outcome piece in there. I have an example in my mind of a program that people liked. All beneficiaries were very, very happy with the program. But when you did the analysis of the data, and it was a financial assets program, they were worse off 5 years later. They had less money 5 years later than they did before. They were very happy with what they had gotten. They didn't understand that they had less money. So you have to be careful what you're doing.
So I think we've just about got going now. We're starting to fire up, aren't we, digging those questions, and we've come to the end of our time, so come tomorrow afternoon. Just a final thought on this, I think, is that in the end this is about accountability to people whose lives we're changing, and you will hear some uncomfortable things in that journey, but we need better businesses and better organisations and create more value from understanding it and managing it. Thank you for your time.